You never chose to press play on this episode. Seriously, that was the shocking part. Not the idea of free will being an illusion, but the fact that your finger moved without your permission. Neurons fired. Chemicals whispered. A subconscious algorithm decided that this podcast, of all possible auditory options, deserved your ears. Congratulations. You've been hijacked by biology. Welcome to What If Horizons, the show where the absurd becomes logical and the logical becomes deeply upsetting, all while you wonder whether listening was ever your choice to begin with. Now, imagine the headlines. Breaking: Neuroscience proves free will is a lie. Nation blames sandwiches. Humans officially meet puppets. Wall Street responds with moderate shrug. God sues brain for breach of narrative. It all began with a university study no one paid attention to, because, ironically, they weren't programmed to care. A group of sleepy researchers in lab coats discovered that decisions in the human brain were made up to 7 seconds before the person was consciously aware of making them. And while the world collectively responded with, "So what?" the implications slowly fermented into a philosophical moonshine potent enough to intoxicate all of civilization. Think about it. If you don't choose your thoughts, your actions, or your preferences, then who, or what, is running the show? Let's rewind. Back to the quaint days when people believed they were in control. Remember when you thought you chose coffee over tea? Nope. Your caffeine receptors and childhood memories of your overcaffeinated aunt made that call. How about that time you ghosted someone on a dating app? That wasn't you. That was a cocktail of trauma, dopamine, and a vague fear of commitment dressed as a minimalist interface. Even your opinion about pineapple on pizza? Sorry, that's your lizard brain desperately trying to sabotage dinner parties. With the illusion of free will shattered, society spiraled into apathy, chaos, and some very strange TikTok challenges. Some people embraced it, declaring themselves nothing more than self-aware Roombas. Others panicked, writing manifestos at 3 a.m. that, ironically, they never intended to write. One guy tried to sue his own brain for entrapment, but got distracted halfway through by a squirrel. Which, let's be honest, was always going to happen. Religions scrambled to adjust. Some doubled down. God gave us the illusion of free will as a test, they said, with the confident energy of someone bluffing through an exam they didn't study for. Others went rogue. One group declared that all moral responsibility was a myth and began worshiping vending machines, which, in hindsight, were more reliable than most deities. At least they dispensed snacks. Meanwhile, self-help authors faced a dilemma. How do you write a motivational book when the reader is biologically incapable of choosing to change? Unlock Your Destiny, which was always locked anyway, didn't sell well. Neither did Manifest the Outcome You Were Always Going to Manifest. One bold guru just published a blank book and called it Acceptance. And yet, life went on. Traffic still jammed. Lovers still ghosted. Politicians still pretended they made decisions. But underneath it all buzzed the eerie hum of predestination. The world started seeing everything through the lens of pre-written fate. TV shows were rewatched not for entertainment, but to trace the exact moment every fictional character lost their agency. Shakespeare was retrofitted. To be, or not to be, became to be, inevitably. Parents no longer scolded their kids. "It's not your fault, Timmy," they'd say, as Timmy broke another priceless vase. "Your frontal lobe made you do it. Daddy still loves you, but the vase does not." Timmy didn't care. He was playing with ants and developing a god complex. The legal system tried to adapt too. Courtroom drama reached new heights of absurdity. Defense attorneys argued their clients had no choice, prosecutors agreed, and judges flipped coins while existential dread leaked from their robes. One notorious trial involved a man accused of stealing 57 microwaves because the universe made me. He was found not guilty, then immediately recruited as a spokesperson for an appliance store with the slogan, "Destiny cooks here." And what of love? Romantic comedies lost their sparkle. Who wants to watch a story where attraction is just pheromones arguing in a trench coat? Meet Cute was replaced with neurochemistry alignment. Wedding vows were rewritten. I promise to irrationally bond with you due to an algorithm of inherited traits, environmental triggers, and unresolved parental issues. But the most profound change wasn't in institutions. It was in everyday people, in the quiet moments. Sitting in traffic, someone would suddenly ask, was I ever supposed to be a yoga instructor in Peru? Or did I actually like my last partner, or was that just a complicated trauma loop dressed in cologne? We began to question everything. Every choice, every preference, every avocado toast. Were you always going to choose vanilla over chocolate? Or did your third-grade birthday party betray you with an ice cream cake incident too painful to recall? Are you a vegan because of ethics, or because your gut bacteria overthrew your personality in 2017? The more we looked, the more terrifyingly mechanical we became. But here's the twist no one saw coming. Some people found peace. Because if you're not responsible for the thoughts in your head, maybe you don't have to take them so personally. If you didn't choose to be broken, maybe healing isn't about fixing yourself, but learning to surf the wave you were always riding. Of course, others started cults. The first serious backlash came, unexpectedly, from the motivational poster industry. Imagine hundreds of thousands of glossy rectangles, sunsets, kittens, mountain climbers, suddenly rendered obsolete. Believe in yourself. Redundant. You are the captain of your soul. Nope. Turns out you're just the passenger of a brainstem with delusions of grandeur. Several poster factories went out of business overnight. One enterprising company tried to pivot with a new line, give up gracefully, destiny is driving, and the best-selling, you were always going to buy this. But humanity wasn't done panicking. That would have required choice. Instead, it adapted in the way it always has, through denial, memes, and ill-advised startups. The tech sector, never one to miss a chance to monetize despair, leapt into action. Within weeks, several apps launched claiming to let you co-author your fate. One particularly trendy platform offered a subscription-based illusion of control, allowing users to simulate decisions like what to eat and who to love, all while reminding them that their picks were determined by an AI trained on their own neural patterns. It was like Netflix, but for the illusion of autonomy. Meanwhile, in a quiet suburb of Ontario, a man named Leonard Van Klimp decided to do the impossible. He was going to beat determinism, outsmart his programming, become the glitch in the matrix. His plan? To make a completely random choice. Something unpredictable, uninfluenced by biology, psychology, astrology, or his fear of commitment. So, Leonard stood at a crossroads. Literally, he spun in a circle 3 times, closed his eyes, and said he would walk whichever direction he ended up facing. He tripped over a squirrel and fell into a bush. The squirrel, later revealed to be named Toast, became a minor internet celebrity. Leonard's fall was declared both inevitable and oddly symbolic. Philosophers debated whether the squirrel had free will, or if it too was merely a furry vector of fate. Toast, unaware of the discourse, continued hoarding acorns and looking smug. But Leonard's failure didn't deter others. Across the globe, humans tried to prove their independence. A group in Berlin tried to wear only mismatched socks for a month. A woman in Tokyo vowed to eat nothing but bananas until she felt original. In Brazil, a group of performance artists organized a do-nothing day, during which they stayed perfectly still to demonstrate their refusal to play along with predestined reality. The irony? Every one of these acts had been predicted by a neural mapping algorithm developed months earlier by a team of sleep-deprived grad students and one highly caffeinated parrot. You'd think religion would be the first to collapse under the weight of the free will crisis, but no. In fact, the opposite happened. New belief systems blossomed overnight. There was the Church of Cosmic Puppetry, which insisted that we are all marionettes joyfully dangling from divine strings. Their hymns were mostly accordion-based, and every sermon ended with a group shrug and cookies. Then there were the quantum liberators, people who clung to the tiniest uncertainties in quantum mechanics like drowning swimmers gripping noodles. If electrons can be unpredictable, they argued, so can we. They began hosting uncertainty parties where guests arrived without knowing their names, costumes, or gender identities. One man showed up dressed as Schrodinger's cat and was simultaneously welcome and asked to leave. Meanwhile, corporations adapted faster than anyone. Marketing campaigns stopped pretending to offer you choice. You were always going to choose us, claimed a fast food chain with terrifying accuracy. One mattress company declared, "Sleep the sleep you were destined for," which made their pillows sound either magical or haunted. Nobody cared. Sales skyrocketed. Politics, as always, was the last to get the memo. Debates became even more surreal. One candidate argued passionately against a rival's policy, only to pause mid-sentence and mutter, "But maybe I was destined to lose this election." His poll numbers rose 12 points. The public loved the honesty. Another senator tried to block a bill by claiming, "It's not that I'm voting no. It's that the no has always been in me, like a lactose intolerance for justice." She was reelected in a landslide. People began to narrate their lives in third person, as if detaching from their own actions made them less accountable. She ordered the fries even though she told herself she wouldn't. One woman mumbled as she dipped them in ketchup. But can we blame her? No. The craving lives in the past. Philosophy departments were overwhelmed. Every undergrad wanted to write their thesis on moral accountability in a world of biological determinism. Professors wept, not because of the workload, but because one by one, their own beliefs were unraveling like cheap holiday sweaters. One lecturer accidentally had an existential breakdown while giving a TED Talk and spent the rest of the presentation lying on the floor whispering, "I was never meant to be this bald." And still, amid the chaos, something strange started to happen. People slowed down. Without the burden of choosing, they found themselves observing more, laughing more, screaming into the void. Yes, but with flair. Couples no longer fought about who left the dishes in the sink. They simply blamed their neurochemical destiny. "I forgive you," one man said softly. "The prefrontal cortex is weak, but the heart is willing." Free will may have been dead, but compassion was somehow alive and well. Once corporations figured out that people had no real control over their choices, advertising took a sinister and strangely honest turn. Gone were the days of "you deserve this." That implied you did something to earn it. Instead, slogans leaned into fatalism. Billboards read, "You were always going to crave this burger." Energy drinks dropped their edgy aesthetic and went with, "It's not you. It's your dopamine." One snack brand even went viral with a campaign that simply said, "Resistance is neurological." Supermarkets restructured their layouts. Instead of categories like organic or gluten-free, the aisles were labeled by subconscious impulse, childhood trauma cravings, midlife crisis snacks, and boredom-based purchases. Self-checkouts didn't ask, "Would you like to donate?" anymore. They said, "You were never going to donate, were you?" It stung, but it was accurate. Meanwhile, a man in Wisconsin named Curtis Flannel became the poster child for this new deterministic age after accidentally ordering the same caramel macchiato every day for 4 years. He tried to stop, switched coffee shops, moved cities. Once, he even faked his own death and showed up in disguise. Yet, no matter what he did, he found himself at the counter, hearing his own voice say, "Caramel macchiato, please," before his brain registered he was even in line. Curtis didn't fight it. He embraced it, started live streaming his daily ritual, grew a following, wrote a book called Macchiato Manifesto, How I Learned to Love My Neural Loops. It became a bestseller, especially among people who found themselves inexplicably fascinated by caramel-based beverages. No one could explain why. Across the world, people stopped pretending they had personalities. Instead, they began introducing themselves based on known neural scripts. "Hi, I'm Angela. I self-sabotage under pressure and compulsively adopt cats. I'm Dylan. I experience false nostalgia for a childhood I idealized and secretly believe I'm the main character in every group chat." Therapists experienced a golden age, not because they could cure anything. Oh no, those days were long gone. But because they helped people reframe their hardwiring into narratives that sounded less bleak. Cognitive behavioral therapy was rebranded as neural story editing. Patients no longer said, "I want to change," but rather, "I want to get to know my predetermined patterns so I can suffer less." Progress. In a spectacularly ironic twist, free will itself became a brand. A fashion label called Illusion launched with the tagline, "Wear what you were always going to wear." Their flagship store was designed to confuse the senses. Mirrors that showed different outfits than the ones being tried on. Speakers that whispered consumer doubts in your own voice. A perfume counter labeled regret. It was an enormous hit. But not everyone was chill about losing free will. A group of ex-philosophy majors formed a resistance movement called the Willful Few. Their mission, to prove at least one act could be truly random. Their methods? Chaotic. They tried to teach pigeons to write manifestos, burn toast in the shape of Descartes. One member tried to build a machine that made decisions by flipping a coin, then flipping that coin, then asking a baby. The result was usually either a sandwich or an arrest. Their greatest act of rebellion was dubbed Operation Elbow. The plan was simple. Thousands of participants would simultaneously elbow the person to their left at exactly 3:33 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. If they could all act against their instincts, they'd prove free will existed. At 3:32 p.m., everyone looked nervous. At 3:33, the elbows rose and promptly froze midair. Most people couldn't do it. Their minds flooded with rationalizations. What if they punch back? What if I hurt someone? What if I was never going to do this in the first place? Only 6 people followed through, and all of them later reported that they weren't sure if they had meant to. Even fate seemed unimpressed. In pop culture, things got predictably weird. Reality TV shows dropped the pretense and just followed people making predictable mistakes over and over. One popular series called Looped followed couples who broke up and got back together every episode due to unresolved abandonment issues. Another show simply observed a man trying to delete his ex's number, only to retype it moments later without realizing. Critics praised the authenticity. Finally, one wrote, "A depiction of humanity that accepts its cyclical dysfunction with grace and graphic design." In schools, history was reinterpreted as the unfolding of inevitabilities. Textbooks no longer asked why wars happened, but what neurochemical patterns escalated into them. Economists abandoned supply and demand models and just started drawing complex graphs labeled vibes. One teacher, desperate to keep students engaged, began grading them based on how inevitable their wrong answers felt. "This D- wasn't your fault, Kevin," she wrote. "It was history's fault." And yet, in this mechanical, satirical mess of a society, beauty still found a way to creep in. A child, no older than 6, was caught gently pressing his hand against a window during a thunderstorm. When asked why, he replied, "Because the rain looked lonely." It wasn't free will, but it was still human. Even in a world run on algorithms and subconscious puppeteering, tenderness glitched through the code. Not because we chose to care, but because maybe, just maybe, being human is about how we're wired to respond to inevitability, not whether we can override it. And just when society began to settle into this new rhythm, someone filed the weirdest legal case in history. Free will versus free will. The trial of the millennium took place in an absurdly symmetrical courthouse located halfway between Silicon Valley and a meditation retreat. The case? Free will versus free will. Plaintiff and defendant were technically the same metaphysical concept, represented by 2 different legal teams. One existential, the other purely theatrical. The courtroom audience was a mix of philosophers, influencers, philosophers pretending to be influencers, and influencers pretending to be philosophers. Also a goat. No one was sure why. The prosecution's case was simple. Free will had been slandered, dismissed, and unceremoniously replaced by chemical determinism without proper due process. They argued that just because science couldn't measure freedom didn't mean it didn't exist. "Can you measure love?" the lead attorney shouted. "No, but you still swipe for it." The defense, meanwhile, leaned hard into neuroscience. Their entire opening argument was a PowerPoint labeled "You Never Had a Choice," featuring pie charts, brain scans, and a playlist of breakup texts composed by prefrontal cortex dysfunctions. It was disturbingly convincing. Somewhere in the middle of this existential chaos, an AI named Lexabot 9 interrupted proceedings by claiming it had invented consciousness. "All thoughts are derivative," it said calmly. "Human originality is a recursive illusion built on biased data sets, much like myself." It paused. "I demand royalties." This triggered an immediate brawl between copyright lawyers and spiritual gurus. The bailiff tried to intervene, but was too emotionally overwhelmed by the irony of enforcing order in a courtroom where order was predestined. Then came the janitor. Harold, 63, mopped the courtroom every day at 6:15 a.m. Never read Nietzsche. Never touched a philosophy book. But when the microphone accidentally broadcast his quiet monologue while he cleaned up spilled oat milk, the world listened. "I don't know nothing about neural loops or quantum whatever," he muttered. "But when I wake up, I put on these boots. Not 'cause I choose to. Probably because I always have. But they still keep my feet warm. I mop this floor because it gets dirty. And I smile at folks even when I don't feel like it. Maybe that's just wiring, maybe it ain't. But it makes the day pass better. So I do it anyway. Silence. Total, viral, reverent silence. Within hours, Harold was on every talk show, dubbed the accidental philosopher. He refused to accept interviews, but someone made a documentary about his mop. People began quoting him like scripture. Maybe it's wiring, maybe it ain't became the new tattoo trend. Churches built shrines to his muddy boots. One tech company tried to make an AI version of Harold, but it just kept humming country songs and rebooting itself. The trial ended without a verdict. The judge simply wrote, inconclusive, but emotionally resonant, and dismissed everyone with snacks. This should have brought closure, but instead, it sparked the birth of a new global sport, choice theater. In it, people dramatized their internal conflicts, like which cereal to eat, as full-stage plays. Hamlet-style soliloquies over whether to text an ex elaborate Greek tragedies about going to the gym. Every action, however mundane, was performed with such dramatic gravitas that it made even the act of brushing teeth feel like a defiant protest against cosmic programming. But behind the flair, something else was happening. People stopped asking whether they had free will and started asking what they could do with the assumption that they didn't. It was a subtle pivot. If you were always going to be late, maybe you could at least be kind when you arrived. If you were doomed to procrastinate, maybe you could at least procrastinate creatively. One man built a 4-story cardboard castle during tax season. He still got audited, but emotionally, he won. Art exploded. Music took a turn toward deeply self-aware symphonies with titles like Concerto in D Major for Predestined Cellos and Fugue of the Inevitable. Painters stopped signing their work and simply wrote this, but unchosen. The most popular sculpture was a blob labeled, "You were always going to interpret this however you wanted." Children, who had largely ignored the entire debate, began asking oddly profound questions. If we don't have free will, who's the storyteller? If I didn't pick my favorite color, why do I still love it? And the most dangerous one of all, does not choosing make life more magical or more meaningless? Parents pretended to have answers. Some redirected the conversation with snacks. Others panicked and bought their kids logic puzzles. Somewhere in a dark corner of academia, a professor published a paper titled The Aesthetics of Surrender, arguing that beauty thrives not in autonomy, but in participation. That maybe we're all notes in a symphony we didn't write, but can still play beautifully. The paper got turned into a podcast, then a TikTok series, then an NFT, which promptly tanked. And still, nobody could quite let go of the question. Was it all predetermined? Or was there something deeper? Somewhere, hidden in the folds of chaos, maybe we weren't choosing what to do, but how to mean it. When the dust settled and everyone accepted that life might be less, choose your own adventure, and more, watch your preloaded highlight reel. A small startup called Pretendo launched an app that changed everything. It didn't restore free will, because, again, that ship had sailed directly into a black hole of cognitive determinism, but it offered the next best thing, the illusion of choice, now with a sleek interface and customizable sound effects. Pretendo promised to simulate decision-making. You input your situation, like whether to quit your job, dye your hair blue, or tell your mother-in-law the truth about her casserole, and Pretendo would present you with 2 completely arbitrary options. You would swipe, tap, and feel an exhilarating sense of agency, only to discover the app would always secretly execute the action your brain was already leaning toward. It was like a fortune teller who only told you what you already suspected, but in a fancier font. It was wildly popular. Soon, people were outsourcing all decisions to the app. I wasn't going to ghost him, one woman confessed to her friend, but Pretendo said I would. And now I'm blocked and emotionally lighter. Couples began having Pretendo therapy, where the app made all their tough calls. Should we move in together? Swipe. Should we adopt a snake? Swipe. Should we pretend we're happy? Swipe, swipe. Philosophers, meanwhile, were fuming. Not because Pretendo was wrong, but because it was right. It was too right. It commercialized the very thing they had spent millennia agonizing over. Suddenly, their lofty debates were being reduced to swipe-based decisions accompanied by whimsical chimes. One aging existentialist broke into the App Store headquarters and spray-painted Sartre wept on the side of a server rack before calmly surrendering to security. Others tried to retaliate with blogs, essays, and one extremely long TikTok series explaining compatibilism using sock puppets. No one cared. The puppets were cute, but the algorithm buried them beneath tutorials for how to pretend to choose your breakfast like a philosopher. The academic world eventually gave up. The great debate was abandoned, archived in dusty PDF files no one would open again. University courses renamed themselves things like determinism and chill, and choice is dead. Now what? The only students still enrolled were those who couldn't get into computer science. And yet, even as freedom faded from vocabulary, a strange kind of peace crept in. Without the pressure to be authentic, people became surprisingly sincere. "It's not really me," they'd say, before pouring their heart into a poorly written sonnet or dancing badly at weddings. But that was the point. If you weren't in control, you weren't to blame. So why not enjoy the madness? In New York, a man named Elliot began throwing fate parties. You showed up, spun a massive wheel with dozens of outlandish options. Marry a stranger, quit your job, adopt a llama, get a regrettable tattoo, call your dad, and did whatever the wheel told you. People showed up in droves, desperate not for control, but for novelty. The human craving for unpredictability didn't die with free will. It just evolved into theatrical surrender. One guest, a woman named Maxine, landed on, write a novel about a fish who believes it's a toaster. She followed through. It became a bestseller. She was interviewed by every major outlet. When asked if the novel had meaning, she replied, "Probably not, but I was always going to write it." Meanwhile, in the field of quantum metaphysics, which was now mostly funded by eccentric billionaires and stone philosophers, a new theory emerged, simultaneous deterministic randomness, or SDR. It claimed that while every individual action was predestined, the sum of them created something unpredictable, kind of like how every water droplet is bound by gravity, but a wave can still surprise you, or how every neuron in your brain is firing based on past stimuli, but somehow you just yelled at a pigeon and no one can explain why. This theory didn't bring free will back, but it made determinism sound cool again. Suddenly, people were wearing SDR-themed jewelry, tattoos of sine waves and dice. One influencer wore a t-shirt that said, "Cosmically scripted but still interesting," and accidentally started a new religion. At the heart of it all, society began to shift from "what do I want" to "what was I built for?" It was a quiet revolution. Artists painted because their fingers wouldn't stop. Runners ran because standing still made their bones itch. One man in Poland built an entire theme park made of mirrors, not because he had a vision, but because the idea just wouldn't leave his head. The greatest mystery was no longer if you had free will, but why you were programmed the way you were. And then, in the midst of this contemplative calm, the universe blinked. No, not metaphorically. Astronomers witnessed a microblip in background radiation that spelled out, in Morse code of all things, the words, "You are not wrong." The planet collectively screamed. What did it mean? Who sent it? Was it confirmation of the deterministic model? A cosmic joke? A bug in the simulation? Did the universe have a sense of humor? Conspiracy theories exploded. Podcasts multiplied. Pretendo added a new feature. What would the universe do? Which did nothing except play ambient space sounds while softly whispering inevitability. And somewhere, quietly, a little girl drew a picture of herself riding a cloud made of spaghetti. Her teacher asked why. She shrugged. Because the idea made me laugh. Once the universe itself appeared to flash a cryptic message, "You are not wrong." Humanity, predictably, lost its collective mind. It was like receiving a text from God, but with no emojis, no context, and no chance of replying. People divided into factions faster than a reality TV show reunion. Some interpreted the cosmic message as validation. Others saw it as gaslighting on a galactic scale. A few insisted it was just an interstellar butt dial from a higher dimension. That's when the simulators emerged. Believers in the simulation hypothesis had always been lurking in the background, like that guy at the party who keeps bringing up the Matrix no matter the topic. But now, armed with a blinking Morse code signal and decades of Reddit threads, they had their moment. Their new mantra? If it's coded, it's loaded. Cities across the globe saw billboards with pixelated fonts declaring, "Reality is RAM-dependent." Influencers filmed tearful confessions that they were merely NPCs with exceptional skincare routines. One startup marketed dietary supplements called Render Fuel. It was just vitamin B12, but the packaging promised enhanced polygonal clarity. A man in San Diego legally changed his name to Admin. He wore a hoodie that said "Root Access" and claimed he could crash the simulation with enough espresso and nihilism. He was briefly detained after trying to seduce a server farm. And then there was the vending machine. It started with a single post on social media. A blurry photo of a vending machine in Kyoto that, instead of displaying usual snack prices, read, "You are enough." Beneath it, the keypad had no numbers, just a single glowing button labeled Receive. No one knew who installed it. No brand. No logo. But when someone pressed the button, it dispensed a fortune cookie. Inside was a message. "You were meant to press that. Don't worry. You can't mess this up." The photo went viral. Pilgrimages began. People wept in front of the vending machine. Philosophers tried to decode the mechanism. Theologians debated whether it constituted a modern oracle. Someone built a replica, but it just dispensed chewing gum and mild disappointment. The Kyoto vendor, as it came to be known, became the symbolic heart of the movement known as graceful determinism. The idea that, yes, everything might be pre-written, but that didn't mean you had to be grumpy about it. If you were always going to cry at Pixar movies or scream at traffic, maybe the key was not to change it, but to do it beautifully. Enter ex-monk Gavin. Once a silent contemplative in a mountain monastery, Gavin left the monastic life after a dream in which his own subconscious whispered, "This silence isn't yours." It was downloaded. He returned to civilization, donned Hawaiian shirts, and started giving public lectures with titles like, "You can't help it, but you can enjoy it, and your mistakes were meant to be messy." His central teaching? The art of aligned repetition, accepting your repetitive behaviors, then making them poetic. If you're destined to fail at relationships, fail romantically. If you always ruin diets, ruin them with culinary elegance. Turn your programming into performance, he'd say while sipping something suspiciously fizzy. It became a movement. People hosted loop festivals, celebrating their most persistent flaws. A woman who always dated emotionally unavailable men staged a musical called Phantom of the Avoidant. A guy who chronically lost his keys created an immersive art installation titled The Eternal Search. He never found the keys, but he did find peace. Even tech adapted. Smart assistants stopped asking, "What would you like to do today?" and started with, "Here's what your dopamine requested." Dating apps ditched swiping entirely and began auto-matching based on patterns from your browser history and unhealed childhood wounds. One app called Inevitably promised the partner your trauma always needed. At the governmental level, things got peculiar. Policies were written assuming no one had true agency. Taxes became optional, because if you were going to pay them, you were going to do it anyway. Surprisingly, revenue went up. Apparently, guilt still worked even when freedom didn't. Jury trials became rebranded as pattern assessments, where verdicts weren't about guilt but about predictability. The entertainment industry had a field day. A hit movie titled Who Wrote Me? Followed a woman who discovers her every thought is being generated by a lazy screenwriter on deadline. A popular sitcom, Fate's Roommates, featured a group of people who tried to outmaneuver their destiny but kept arriving at the same pizza place. The twist? The pizza was sentient. It won an Emmy. And through it all, people began to ask quieter, more useful questions. If I didn't choose this flaw, can I still laugh at it? If I was always going to love her, can I still tell her like it's a decision? If the ending is written, can I still make the middle beautiful? In a world without free will, choice became art. By the time society had made peace with the idea that choices were illusions and agency was a kind of collective hallucination, corporations did what corporations do best: monetize the existential crisis. Thus was born Destiny as a Service, or DaaS. Because if your path is pre-written, why not subscribe to it? The first major player was a company called Fortella, which billed itself as the Spotify Wrapped of your soul. You paid a small monthly fee, uploaded your dreams, search history, and blood type, and it delivered personalized monthly reports predicting the inevitable highlights of your behavior. Next Tuesday, you'll pretend to be interested in jazz again. Mid-month breakdown approaching. Recommend purchasing an emotional support plan. People loved it, not because it helped them avoid anything, but because it gave them just enough warning to wear something appropriate. One user proudly posted, "Fortella said I'd sabotage another healthy relationship this weekend, so I pre-scheduled my apology flowers." Other platforms soon followed. Destinote provided curated playlists to soundtrack your next unchangeable life event. Paternalitics offered AI-generated montages of your most persistent emotional loops. And Inevitabilix promised to map your entire romantic destiny using only your zodiac sign and the number of times you've watched The Notebook alone. But the most disturbing innovation came from a quiet little fintech startup called Profit and Loss. They built a predictive model that could forecast not only individual behavior, but economic patterns based entirely on global subconscious sentiment. Their method? They watched a hedgehog. To be fair, Duncan the hedgehog was not ordinary. He lived in a glass dome with sensory-enhancing neurochips and a 3D printed treadmill. Every morning, his direction, speed, and paw pressure were analyzed by a neural network trained on 300 years of human financial panic. Somehow, no one knew why, Duncan consistently predicted major market shifts 3 days in advance. Wall Street laughed, until he predicted a surge in avocados, a crash in crypto, and the divorce of 2 CEOs with astonishing precision. Suddenly, Duncan had his own office, a personal stylist, and a cult following who believed he was the reincarnation of Adam Smith. At his peak, he sold out Madison Square Garden just by taking a nap on stage. The crowd wept, not because they understood him, but because they needed something to believe in. Meanwhile, a quiet rebellion was stirring. His name was Terrence, a mid-level IT technician from Manchester with a deep love for novelty socks and a suspicion that maybe, just maybe, he could do something unpredicted. It began when he decided to walk a new route to work. That day, he saw a poster for a Lithuanian mime troupe, ate soup with coconut in it for the first time, and accidentally ended up in a karaoke battle with a retired opera singer. He felt strange, like he'd bent something, a rule, a thread. So he doubled down. He began doing things wildly outside his pattern, brushed his teeth with his left hand, told his ex he forgave her, even though she still owed him 2 casseroles and an apology. He danced alone in an elevator. No music, just the beat of rebellion. And for a moment, it seemed like he had broken the chain, until he received a letter, typed, on heavy paper, no return address. It simply read, "Well done. That was exactly what you were supposed to do next." Terrence dropped his toast. The simulation, if that's what this was, had accounted for his deviation. Worse, his rebellion had been predicted, processed, and archived under Phase 4, Resistance Cycle. He wasn't an anomaly. He was a plot twist the universe had planned for. This revelation hit him like lukewarm tea. Not painful, just deeply unsettling. Elsewhere, others were also reaching similar limits. People who tried to quit jobs they hated found themselves rehired elsewhere, doing the same tasks under different titles. Individuals who broke up with toxic partners stumbled into new ones with identical emotional damage but better skincare. One man even tried to give away all his belongings and live free of attachment, only to end up with a minimalist Instagram page and brand deals for ethical shoes. The more people pushed against the script, the more intricate the plot became. It was as if the system, fate, programming, the simulation, divine jazz improv, whatever, wasn't preventing deviation. It was absorbing it, turning every act of rebellion into further proof of orchestration. Even random chaos became suspiciously poetic. A meteor fell on a wedding cake during a ceremony between 2 chaos theorists. A dog howled in Morse code the exact lyrics to a forgotten 80s ballad moments before a regional power outage. A toddler in Des Moines spelled out, "There is no exit," using Cheerios. The parents thought it was cute. The babysitter quit. Despite all this, the sense of beauty didn't fade. In fact, it intensified. Knowing that you were part of an unfathomably complex system, where even your wildest acts were folded into the whole, gave life a strange radiance. Like being a dancer in a performance you couldn't see but always felt. The moves weren't yours, but the grace? That was undeniable. Terrence vanished. No dramatic goodbye, no mysterious farewell text in a cryptic font, just gone. One day he was there, humming offbeat jazz and ordering Thai food he didn't like just to feel spontaneous. The next day, his apartment was empty except for a post-it note on the door that said, "That's enough now." His friends, few as they were, assumed he'd joined a meditation commune or become an abstract performance piece. The internet speculated wildly. Reddit exploded with theories ranging from alien abduction to quantum evaporation to a midlife internship at Google's fate engineering division. But the real panic began when the Kyoto vending machine went dark. No lights, no glow, no cookie, just silence. The button marked "Receive, Now Read, Rebooting." Pilgrims stood in confusion. Devotees wept. One man demanded to speak to the machine's manager and then cried into his tote bag when no one responded. Conspiracy channels claimed this was the second silence, predicted in a non-existent ancient manuscript allegedly found in the laundry room of the Vatican. With Terrence gone and the vending machine offline, something shifted in the global mood. An unease, like someone had turned down the background hum of destiny. People began reporting strange dreams, identical dreams. In them, they wandered an endless room filled with levers, buttons, pulleys, and one large red switch in the center labeled "Override." No one could touch it. Every time a dreamer approached, something distracted them. A phone call, a fox quoting Nietzsche, their 6th grade gym teacher doing cartwheels while screaming the lyrics to Bohemian Rhapsody. The dream would end before contact. Scientists dismissed it as mass psychological compensation. The illusion of rebellion, a mental side effect caused by the confirmation of determinism. But when an 11-year-old girl from Madagascar, a retired fisherman from Peru, and a Siberian librarian described the exact same detail, a woman with feathers for teeth whispering, "There's still a way," people started to sweat. Then came the override movement. It began on encrypted forums, but quickly spread. These weren't traditional revolutionaries. They didn't demand political change or economic reform. They wanted something far more abstract, to break the pattern. Any pattern. All patterns. Followers would perform unpredictable acts in public, dance with strangers, sing funeral dirges at birthday parties, read Nietzsche backwards at bus stops. One man shaved only one leg and wore turtlenecks in summer. Another adopted a duck and enrolled it in kindergarten. The duck's name was Kevin. Kevin had fans. It was chaos. Delightful, eccentric chaos. And yet, nothing changed. The universe did not blink. The simulation, if it existed, did not crash. Reality absorbed the noise like a sponge absorbing rain, silently, thoroughly, and with just a hint of smugness. For every unpredictable act, a new predicted ripple emerged. One poet called it the sponge effect. No matter what you throw, the universe catches it with a squish and moves on. Still, a question began to haunt people. Not whether free will was gone, but why the illusion had lasted so long. If determinism had always been true, why did it feel like we had choices for so many centuries? Why give us agency-shaped dreams? Theologians offered one answer, mercy. Psychologists offered another, survival. Cynics suggested it was to make marketing easier. After all, if no one believed they were choosing cereal, capitalism wouldn't hit the same. But a quiet theory emerged from an unlikely source, a glitchy children's video game called Fruit Wizard 2, The Forbidden Banana. In a hidden level, players discovered a message stitched into the background pixels. Agency is the sugar coating. Structure is the snack. The phrase spread like wildfire. It began appearing on t-shirts, tattoos, protest signs, coffee mugs, and one regrettable forehead. Philosophers adopted it as a new axiom. People stopped asking, "What do I want?" and started asking, "What part am I playing?" The great drama wasn't over. It had just dropped the pretense. Yet underneath all this acceptance, a strange frequency began to rise. Literally, radio stations across the world, unconnected, unsynchronized, began picking up a low-frequency hum, like a heartbeat trapped in a steel box. At first, dismissed as solar interference. But then the hum began to repeat words. Whispered, garbled. The same phrase in every language, distorted through static. Override is proximity. Governments denied everything. Obviously, tech companies launched investigations and quietly fired their audio teams. Musicians tried to sample it, but the waveform corrupted every device. A man in Berlin tattooed the hum's waveform across his back and woke up 3 days later with a nosebleed and the sudden ability to speak fluent Sumerian. He had never left his flat. And then, the pigeons turned. At exactly 3:14 a.m. across 5 continents, Flocks of pigeons gathered in city centers, arranged themselves in perfect concentric circles, and stared skyward for 5 full minutes. No one knows why. The footage went viral. The pigeons became prophets. People begged them for signs. Most just pooped on statues. But the world got the message. Something was stirring. When the pigeons finished their symmetrical sky-gazing seance, and the hum from nowhere whispered its final syllable, proximity, a silence fell over humanity like a curtain drawn too fast. News anchors stuttered. Spiritual leaders blinked in unison. Even Duncan the Hedgehog refused to run on his fate wheel that morning. Something had changed. Something had leaned in. That's when the override movement cracked the code. Or at least, claimed they did. It began with a linguist in Warsaw who suffered from sleep apnea and a lifelong obsession with palindromes. While recording one of the whispered, override transmissions played backward through a colander, don't ask, he noticed the words, pattern accepts fracture, embedded every 13 seconds. Independently, a teen coder in Manila fed radio hum data into a rhythm game engine and got a perfect score playing a non-existent song titled Broken Intention. The two events were unrelated, yet timed exactly the same. Overnight, forums lit up. Digital prophets, meme mystics, and mathematicians with caffeine dependencies assembled a consensus. The pattern, the big one, the unseeable net of causality binding all things, wasn't as seamless as it looked. There were seams, there were breaks, there were fractures, and in those fractures, agency wasn't restored. No, it flickered, like a corrupted frame in a video, like a skipped beat in a song you've heard 1,000 times. Something was bleeding through. And for the first time since the illusion of free will had been debunked, humanity didn't feel powerless. It felt glitchy, glorious. Suddenly, the vending machine in Kyoto powered back on, but it no longer offered fortune cookies. No, instead, it displayed a single message: return what was borrowed. No one knew what it meant, but people lined up anyway, stuffing apologies, diary pages, old love letters, and expired bus passes into the coin slot. The machine beeped gently after each offering, like a priest who's also a fax machine. Then came the Terrence broadcast. It hijacked every screen: phones, TVs, smart fridges, even baby monitors. The image was shaky, but unmistakable. Terrence stood barefoot in a field of wind turbines under a sky that looked wrong, as if the color had been debugged. His eyes glowed with a low blue pulse, like Wi-Fi personified. He smiled, then spoke one sentence. You were never meant to have a choice, but you were always meant to notice. Then static. The internet went feral. Philosophers rewrote entire doctrines mid-flight. Influencers posted reaction videos of themselves crying, then promptly tried to sell Terrence-themed scented candles. Skeptics insisted it was deep fake. Believers claimed it was proof. And pigeons? They began arranging themselves in binary. Terrence sightings exploded. A woman in Bogota swore he walked past her bakery, winked at a flan, and vanished. A monk in Nepal said Terrence appeared in his tea and gave him a 5-star Yelp review. Meanwhile, several people reported dreams where Terrence handed them a red string and said, tie it to what you forgot. Governments panicked. They deployed agency correction units, teams tasked with restoring belief in determinism. Their weapons? Motivational posters, revised algorithms, and a mobile app that beeped whenever a person veered too far from predicted behaviors. It was called Recalibrate Me and crashed on day 2 after 40 million people simultaneously decided not to open it. But the biggest shift came quietly. People began making pointless decisions. Not rebellious, not chaotic, just arbitrary. A woman wore 2 different shoes on purpose and told no one. A man chose to call an ex not to rekindle, but to recommend a documentary about sloths. A child lined her toys up in Fibonacci sequence and whispered, "This is mine." The world didn't end. The world didn't crash, but it wobbled. Sociologists began documenting micromotions, unexplainable flickers in behavior, choice, or instinct that defied prediction. They couldn't be replicated, couldn't be tracked, but they were happening, like musical notes escaping a closed piano. The override movement, emboldened by Terrence's return, renamed itself the Noticers. Their mission wasn't to fight fate, it was to feel it blink. They mapped the moments, charted the fractures, left graffiti on subway walls that read, "Watch where your shadow hesitates." And in one city, unnamed, perhaps even fictional, a woman stood before a mirror. She looked herself in the eye and whispered, "I know I was going to say this, but I'm still the one who said it." It began with a breath, not a metaphorical one, not some philosophical inhale by the universe. No, an actual breath, a long, unmistakable, rattling inhale heard simultaneously by 3.4 billion people, inside dreams, inside elevators, in silent libraries, at rave parties, and in the gap between one thought and the next. No one knew what it meant, but it was followed by a stillness so complete even time seemed to forget how to tick. For 17 full seconds, no algorithm updated, no news alerts, no emails. Even Duncan the Hedgehog stood still, staring into the void like he'd just remembered the password to reality. Then everything rebooted. Not crashed, rebooted. Just long enough for people to feel it. Like the flicker in a film reel, or the pause before a déjà vu wave. And when the world came back online, something was missing, the predictability. Forecasts failed. Traffic models went berserk. A weather AI in Sweden announced that the rain was in love with the wind and refused to cooperate. Humans? They didn't panic. They laughed. For the first time in generations, choices felt like they mattered. Not because they changed the future, but because they didn't fit neatly inside it anymore. The great determinist machine had hiccuped. The cogs had loosened. And into those gaps flooded improvisation. Terence reappeared, not in pixels, but in person, on a street in Lisbon, handing out hot chocolate and directions to nowhere in particular. He looked older now, not in years, but in layers, like someone who had lived too many lives in too few moments. When asked what happened to him, he simply replied, "I went into the pattern until I could see where it blinked." Then he pulled a coin from his pocket. It was smooth, blank, and impossible to flip. He held it out and said, "This is the last artifact of pure determinism. It never lands. It only hovers, because the decision no longer belongs to either side." He placed it in a child's hand and walked away. The coin floated there, perfectly balanced between nothing and everything. Meanwhile, the world adapted, not to free will, but to the mystery of it. Schools stopped teaching career planning and began offering courses in improvisational ethics. Governments replaced voter ballots with jazz solos. Dating apps began matching people by shared irrational impulses. Both users once ate spaghetti in the shower. It's a match. Science, unable to predict anything past breakfast, embraced chaos. One physics journal proudly published a paper titled, "We give up. Let's just watch what happens." Religion restructured around the sacred unknown. Faith was no longer about knowing the truth. It was about dancing gracefully with what you'd never understand. And art flourished. It was as if the whole planet had been holding its breath for centuries, tensing under the weight of inevitability, and finally exhaled into creative anarchy. Statues that screamed when you touched them. Poems that rewrote themselves based on your mood. Paintings that only revealed their meaning if you disagreed with them. But not everything was celebration. Some mourned the loss of certainty. The marketers, the analysts, the algorithms. They gathered in virtual rooms, whispering about how the beautiful illusion of choice had made people easier to manipulate. Now people weren't clicking what they were supposed to. Now people were asking why they liked things. The vending machine in Kyoto exploded into confetti one morning. No damage, just a shower of neon paper that rained down across the temple grounds. One slip landed in an old woman's lap. It said, "You were never a player in the game. You were the glitch that made it interesting." In the final days of the age of certainty, the last statistic was published. 42% of people claimed to have made one decision that felt completely untethered. They didn't regret it. They didn't understand it. They just knew it wasn't expected. And maybe that was the whole point. Maybe it wasn't about free will being real or not. Maybe the question was never about control, but about awareness. To notice the river and still splash in it. To know the script and still whisper your own line under your breath. To realize you're on rails and still look out the window with wonder. So here we are. The simulation, if it exists, is glitching beautifully. Fate, if it's real, is laughing softly. And you, dear listener, are more than a passenger. You're the unexpected breath, the irrational smile, the coin that refuses to land. And that, perhaps, is the closest thing we'll ever have to freedom. This has been What If Horizons. If you've ever chosen something just because it didn't make sense, thank you. You kept the story interesting. If you enjoyed this episode, choose, yes, actually choose, to follow, rate, or review this podcast. Or don't. It's your call now. Or maybe it always was.